Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. The monster storm which took down trees, destroyed homes and has left at least 11 people dead in Florida. Hurricane Milton sparked tornadoes and cut the power for millions of homes, leaving a multi-billion-dollar bill. The damage, though, could have been even greater without the evacuation of hundreds of thousands of people. Florida's governor says his state avoided the worst.
Also on Sky News at 10, live from Jerusalem, the tension on Israel's northern border. Exchanges of fire with Hezbollah militants as the UN says Israeli forces injured 2 of its peacekeepers. And the continuing horror inside Gaza after an Israeli airstrike on a school turned shelter kills at least 26.
Plus, the Prince and Princess in public together for the first time since her cancer diagnosis was revealed, paying tribute to the victims of the Southport attacks.
And in the heat and dust of Multan, he becomes only the 6th England batsman to make 300.
How Harry Brook and England's cricketers smashed their way to a record-breaking Test innings. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Good evening. President Biden said last night that Hurricane Milton looked like the storm of the century. Thankfully, that appears not to have come to pass. But at least 11 people are dead and as much as $50 billion worth of damage has been done to a swathe of Florida. The decision to order millions of people to evacuate from the region appears to have saved many lives. Well, the hurricane first made landfall at Siesta Key near Sarasota at around 8:30 in the evening local time as a Category 3 storm. The surrounding areas of Tampa and Fort Myers were also hit. 126 tornado warnings were issued as Milton was downgraded to Category 1 while it moved across the state. It's now past Florida's east coast and into the Atlantic as a tropical storm. Our US correspondent, James Matthews, sent this report from Siesta Key.
Siesta Key is where the Gulf of Mexico meets land. It's where Hurricane Milton met Florida. This was the result. A storm surge combined with strong winds that left streets flooded and littered with debris. Chainsaws and generators gave a soundtrack to the relief effort the morning after. It had been a difficult night in a deadly storm.
It was just bang, bang. You can hear it on the roof. You can hear it on the hitting the windows. So it was kind of like my girlfriend was definitely a little scared.
I was in a safe place in my house, so.
All right. What was the safe place in your house?
Bunkered down by like the closets in the hallway.
That way. Our houses are okay, and we're all healthy. We're all still alive.
That's the main thing.
That's the main thing.
This was how the storm looked barreling through Siesta Key overnight. And this was the city of Tampa. The force of the hurricane was something no one here had experienced before, even if its impact wasn't as bad as had been feared.
What we can say is the storm was significant, but thankfully this was not the worst case scenario. The storm did weaken before landfall, and the storm surge, as initially reported, has not been as significant overall as what was observed for Hurricane Helene.
Daylight brought news of fatalities, but there was good news on Tampa Bay. Good morning. You made it. We'd spoken to Joseph Malinowski, who defied advice to evacuate and stayed on his boat. He made it through the night. Scary?
No, it wasn't scary. I just sat here and watched TikTok all night.
There were rescues by boat.
Let me spin around.
This one of a 14-year-old boy.
Grab him. What?
Sorry.
And there were near misses as trees were weakened by the wind. In the storm winds, a crane fell to the ground in St. Petersburg. And this was the scene at the Tampa Bay Rays baseball stadium, where the roof was ripped off.
I'm sad to see it happen, but look, I can't change it.
This wasn't Florida's first hurricane, and it wasn't Mike Mossy. We joined him as he returned home after the storm through a flooded neighborhood. The worry was the basement. Mike had left $1 million worth of vehicle, a Lola T163 and a Maserati with 100 miles on the clock, both ruined.
They're totaled.
Really?
Yeah, totaled.
Why?
Corrosion, salt water, takes out everything. Yeah.
Dare I ask how you feel?
You know, it is what it is. I can't change it. You know, and I did all the prep we could ahead of time, and nobody ever thought the last two hurricanes would be like this, so, you know.
So you've lost your Maserati and your racing car?
Yeah. No Goodwood for me this year.
As bad as all of this is, it could have been much worse. That's acknowledged by the authorities, who'd billed Hurricane Milton as a historic storm. It was another dreadful hurricane experience here, but it was the long, difficult night when Florida got lucky. James Matthews, Sky News, in Siesta Key, Florida.
Well, the main reason the hurricane appears to have done less damage than originally thought is the absence of the huge storm surge of water, which forecasters predicted. Milton did, though, create an unexpected number of tornadoes, which were responsible for at least 10 of the known deaths so far. Our science and technology editor, Tom Clark, has this assessment of what happened.
Hurricane Milton was powerful and destructive, but was a long way from the storm of the century. Did forecasters get it wrong? Well, in short, no. What worried them most was how Milton grew. This reconstruction of the developing storm, based on satellite data, shows how it intensified from a Category 1 to a Category 5 hurricane in less than 24 hours, one of the fastest ever recorded. Rapid changes like that worry forecasters because they're hard to track. Then add in warm seas that give hurricanes power. This is the average temperature of the ocean in the Gulf of Mexico, and this year temperatures have been well above that. And don't forget, ahead of Milton was a highly unusual outbreak of tornadoes with huge destructive power. At least 19 were recorded along the front margin of the storm, and here in red, the highest number of tornado warnings ever for Florida. The wind shear caused by the coming storm, combined with warm, wet air being carried by it, hitting cooler air over the land, triggered these twisters and 200-mile-an-hour winds, massively increasing the damage caused. But the greatest risk from the hurricane was a storm surge, and there Milton, fortunately, failed to deliver. As it made landfall, 120-mile-an-hour winds drew water away from Tampa Bay and then piled it up here between Sarasota and Fort Myers. The peak storm surge forecast was up to 15 feet. For context, that's 4.5 metres, more than twice my height. But the tide gauge data shows little more than 5 feet along the worst affected coast. So did forecasters overestimate the risk? Not really. Remember, 24 hours before landfall, Milton was still a Category 5 hurricane. Its track, almost perfectly forecast days in advance, took it directly to the Tampa Bay area and more than 7 million people. Evacuations probably saved many lives, even from this less powerful storm. And only 2 weeks ago, the conversation among experts was around why the number of hurricanes this season had been below average despite record warm oceans. Now that's all changed. With Helene and now Milton, there have been 9 hurricanes, 4 of them major, and 31 days of hurricane activity, a well above average season. A warming climate is making storms grow stronger, faster, and hurricane seasons potentially harder to forecast. And with 6 weeks of the season left to run, there may be more to come.
Well, our US correspondent Mark Stone is in St. Petersburg, Florida tonight, close to where the hurricane made landfall. And Mark, what's the extent of the damage where you are?
Well, I mean, first of all, Gillian, it was an extraordinary weather event, as they say. There's no question about that. When we drove up from Miami on the East Coast last night, we drove along the road that crosses the Florida Peninsula, and we went through weather that ranged from kind of like this to torrential rain, and we were going through some of those tornadoes that Tom described there. They were very frightening. Heavy, heavy rain and visibility of almost zero. Warnings on our phones that tornadoes were in the area. That was a surprise, certainly. The other thing that was a surprise was the behavior of this hurricane as it was out at sea. When it made landfall, though, it had lowered in terms of its intensity. And I think that, combined with the fact that many, many people did heed the warnings to escape and to evacuate, that made all the difference. You can see behind me here, Florida Field, the baseball stadium that has been the roof almost entirely ripped off. It is a soft roof, so you can see perhaps why it would have been removed. This stadium was to be used by the emergency services. They'd moved in there so that they were ready. Of course, when the roof came off, they couldn't be there. I think this today has been a story of a very lucky escape for Florida, but swirling around behind this storm, of course, is the politics and the misinformation, extraordinary misinformation by a small group on the Republican side of politics here, but an influential group going right to the top. Donald Trump himself, his surrogate, Elon Musk, with so much influence in terms of social media, they have been pushing things that simply are not true. So behind the storm, which was not as bad as feared, so much politics.
Mark, thank you. It's been 7 long months since the Princess of Wales revealed her cancer diagnosis, and today she took another significant step towards her return to public life, appearing with her husband for the first time. It was to remember an event which is said to have moved the couple deeply, the Southport killings, when 3 young girls were stabbed at a Taylor Swift-themed dance event. Our royal correspondent Rhiannon Mills reports from Southport.
It feels like a long time since we've seen them out like this, and we hadn't expected the princess. But Southport was a community visit they both had personally wanted to make. Away from the cameras, they just had private meetings with the families of the 3 young girls who died in the summer. The princess asked by one paramedic how they were doing.
They're okay, but you're managing it differently. All the families are so different, and individually too, they're managing it and processing.
We were told they spent half an hour each with the parents of 6-year-old BB King, 7-year-old Elsie Stankham and 9-year-old Alice Da Silva Aguirre, who all died after the knife attack at the Taylor Swift dance event. At the time, the Prince and Princess said it was unimaginable what had happened. It hit home even more because he'd taken George and Charlotte to one of Taylor Swift's UK concerts. Back in the summer, I was told that the Prince and Princess had been really personally upset by what had happened in Southport because the children involved are around the same age as their own children. So when we found out that Prince William was going to make this visit here, it then sort of made sense that the Princess also decided that she wanted to come as well and make this her first community visit after what has been a difficult year. But the focus for the couple was also on those who rushed to help that day and how hard it's been ever since.
My hands are sweating, my legs are shaking.
We have been told not to expect to see Kate doing too many of these kind of visits as she continues her cancer recovery, which, for those who met her, made it even more poignant.
The Princess just broke from the group and followed the first responders back into the building to just give them all a hug. So that just says it all, really, doesn't it?
On their way home, they posted on social media, "We continue to stand with everyone in Southport." An important message that together they wanted to deliver. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News in Southport.
Hello, I'm Yalda Hakim, live from Jerusalem. Here in Israel, we continue to wait and see what the country's response will be to Iran's missile assault last week. But while we wait, Israel's assault on 2 other fronts has claimed victims and concern from the United Nations. In Gaza, at least 26 people died when a school-turned-shelter was targeted by an airstrike. A Sky News team saw that children were among the victims. And in Lebanon, 2 UN peacekeepers were injured after being fired on by an Israeli tank. Well, the Israel Defense Forces have restricted access for journalists to the border region. But today, our international affairs editor Dominic Waghorn travelled to Metula with the IDF. This is his report.
On the ground.
They say Metula is the most bombed town in Israel. You needn't be here long to find out why. The town has been bombarded like this for a year, surrounded on 3 sides by Hezbollah. Israel has closed this area to journalists throughout this war. We were among the first to visit under military escort.
We've been brought right up against the border with Lebanon here. That is the border fence there with those white pylons intersecting it along the hillside there. This is as close as Israelis have been prepared to bring journalists since their invasion of Lebanon began over a week ago. A sign perhaps of their confidence about the way that operation is going.
Since Israeli forces crossed this border, there's been heavy fighting just inside Lebanon for a week, with Hezbollah forced back from the border. The few Israelis left in this deserted town say their military shouldn't leave Lebanon until it's destroyed the enemy completely.
How long do you think the Israeli army should stay in Lebanon?
Until it will be quiet, until we will finish Hezbollah. I think we need to destroy Hezbollah, to finish them, to all the organization, and after that it will be peace. And it can be done.
Sounds like a long war.
Yeah, but we are strong.
Israel's invasion of Lebanon appears to be deepening, and its airstrikes are hitting targets across the country. Here in the Bekaa Valley today, many miles north. The UN today said its peacekeepers were struck too, injured when an Israeli tank shell was fired on their post. When it launched its invasion 10 days ago, Israel called it a limited operation that would end when people feel safe and can return to their homes.
Another alarm. OK. You have to go, Patch.
From what's going on the border, that seems a distant prospect for now. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, Metula in northern Israel.
Well, Israel's Security Cabinet were due to meet tonight with potential action against Iran likely on the agenda. Ahead of that meeting, I sat down with former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, who told me all options should be on the table for retaliation against Iran, including targeting the country's supreme leader. Have a listen.
Iran is the Islamic Republic of Iran, to be accurate. The regime, I'm separating it from the people. The people are an amazing people, the Iranians. But the regime is not really a regular regime. It's an octopus of terror. It's the head of the octopus, and we should not take anything off the table.
Including targeting the supreme leader?
Everything should be on the table.
Naftali Bennett there. Well, more than 42,000 people have now been killed in Gaza, and to that number were added at least 26 more today. They died when a school where people were sheltering was hit in an airstrike. Israel said it had been targeting Hamas. Our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle reports.
The world's focus in recent weeks has been on Israel's invasion of Lebanon. But Israel's invasion of Gaza continues. Today, around lunchtime, an Israeli airstrike hit a medical clinic in Gaza City. Among the dead were 6 children.
We were just sitting in our rooms when it happened. The place is filled with children, women and children. That's it. You don't find adult men here. This is who Israel targets.
Another Israeli airstrike hit a school in Deir al-Balah in central Gaza. At least 26 people were reportedly killed this time. Some of the children had been on the street outside selling sweets.
It's always like this. These are innocent people. They just call them terror targets, but these are civilians. They're peaceful. They've been displaced multiple times. We've all been pushed out of our homes and come here to die, and they just keep on killing.
The wounded, and there were at least 70 according to health officials in Gaza, were rushed to hospital. Israel says both strikes targeted Hamas, but the Israeli military hasn't shown any evidence to back up that claim. The death toll in Gaza has now surpassed 42,000. More than 90% of the population is displaced, many of them multiple times over. Ceasefire talks broke down a long time ago. The war is now into its 2nd year, and the only certainty is that more people will be killed. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Jerusalem.
The Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, said the government is both pro-worker and pro-business today, as it unveiled one of the key pieces of legislation promised in the Labour manifesto. The Employment Rights Bill will see major reforms in the workplace, although it could take as long as 2 years to pass, as the government considers the views of unions and businesses. Amongst the key measures, workers will receive protection from unfair dismissal from day one, rather than the current 2 years. The government will consult with companies on a statutory probation period of up to 9 months, during which workers can be dismissed fairly through a lighter touch process. And there'll be a ban on exploitative zero-hour contracts, as our business correspondent Paul Kelso reports.
Delivering on workers' rights. The Deputy Prime Minister and Business Secretary sharing the heavy lifting on reforms that extend protection from unfair dismissal and improve sick pay and parental leave.
These packages are pro-business and pro-worker, and we've worked with businesses, big, small, medium, all over the country, and we've had many of them welcome the measures that we're saying. We've acknowledged some of the challenges around these are a huge reform package, so therefore we're going to make sure that they're part of the process.
There are measures to protect more than 1 million zero-hours workers like Zoe, a carer looking after the most vulnerable in society, who hopes employers will now better look after her.
I do think having decent contracts, having job security and feeling confident every day that your job has some respect for you will boost a lot of morale and go one step to getting everything that we deserve.
The reforms will not be quick. Many of the measures won't become law for at least 2 years, and moves to tackle inequality in the gig economy by creating a single category of worker even longer. This legislation is an attempt to deliver on one key election promise to improve workers' rights without compromising another, the delivery of economic growth. They should be complementary. Happier workers should be more productive and everybody wins. But in reality, this has been a point of tension with business, and this policy is full of compromise. Unions would like change sooner, but say concerns about the cost are misplaced.
We've tested, haven't we, for the last 14 years to destruction the idea that somehow low-skilled, insecure employment is the driver of economic growth. What we've had is effectively economic stagnation and fall in real terms wages. So I think this is a package of measures that will boost the incomes of millions of working people, but crucially will also provide a much-needed kickstart to the UK economy as well.
In an economy short on froth, businesses large and small fear extending rights equals rising costs and bigger risks.
We've already got good practices. We already care a lot about our employees, but we need to be able to be supported in order to upkeep those good practices in what are fairly challenging times on the high street.
Millions will be better off as a result of reforms that attempt to satisfy unions and business. Ministers hope both will see their cup as half full. Paul Kelso, Sky News.
The new head of NATO told Sky News today that Ukraine's allies shouldn't listen to President Putin's sabre-rattling and that the alliance could fight off any threat. Mark Rutte was speaking after meeting Ukraine's president and Sir Keir Starmer in Downing Street. Our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, has more.
Armed with what he's calling a victory plan, Ukraine's president stops off in London as part of a rapid tour of European capitals.
Today I want, of course, to share with you details on the victory plan. Where I count on you. Have a trilateral meeting.
Also in town and invited into Downing Street is NATO's new chief.
It's so good to have you here so early on in your tenure.
Speaking to Sky News afterwards, the former Dutch Prime Minister declines to divulge details about Ukraine's plan to repel Russia's invasion, but he says he hopes victory comes as soon as possible.
What is clearly the case is that we have to continue supporting them so that Zelensky, his team, Ukraine as a whole, is in a strong position one day to, when they decide, enter into what form of negotiations.
A key request by Ukraine has been permission to use Western long-range missiles against targets inside Russia, something that the UK and other allies have yet to grant.
Is it making Ukraine weaker, the fact that they haven't agreed this yet?
I'm not sure it is, because there is this risk that we completely focus on one weapon system. The main issue here is making sure that the military aid continues to flow into Ukraine, and then one weapon system will not change the outcome of the war.
And do you think that allies should listen to Vladimir Putin when he's clearly threatened that should this permission be given about the long-range weapons, that it would escalate? He'd see that as direct NATO involvement in the war. Should allies listen to Vladimir Putin's sabre-rattling?
No, they shouldn't, and they don't. NATO is strong. We can face any adversary. We have everything in place to make sure that NATO is safe, is secure, and that we can fight off any threat. And we will never be intimidated by anyone outside NATO trying to threaten us. So that is of no use. He could better stop that.
The biggest threat right now is to Ukraine. Here, a Russian strike on President Zelensky's hometown of Kryvyi Rih. This country isn't yet a member of NATO, but it'll be hoping its allies have the strength and stamina to achieve Ukraine's vision of victory. Deborah Haynes, Sky News.
An inspection into a Manchester prison, previously known as Strangeways, has found catastrophic levels of drug use, organised crime and violence amongst inmates. It's the 8th prison to be put on urgent notification in the last 2 years. But the pressure on the justice system is not just in prisons. There's a warning today that court delays are leaving survivors of sexual violence with post-traumatic stress disorder. Ashna Haranag spoke to one woman who had to wait 5 years for her day in court.
The wait between being a victim of crime and awaiting the trial has never been so long. Survivors of alleged sexual offences are among those waiting the longest for justice. On average, almost 2 years. Emmy waited 5.
agony. It just got to the point where I kept saying to my court therapist, like, I don't want to do it anymore. And she kept saying, like, you know, give it a week, see if you still feel that way, because it'd be, leading up to it, I'd be like a very anxious mess. I'd constantly feel nauseous, I wouldn't have an appetite, I wouldn't be sleeping very well. I'd have like panic, like multiple a day.
The trial was postponed 8 times. Sometimes you would only find out that morning.
I'd already gotten ready, tried to hype myself up, had all this adrenaline going. And then because it didn't happen, it had nowhere to go but turn into an anxiety attack.
As of March, a record 10,141 sexual offences cases in England and Wales hadn't been given a Crown Court date, a backlog that's been building for years.
This is a multifaceted mess. There are issues and shortages with judges and barristers and a distinct lack of courtroom availability. Add in pandemic delays and issues around scheduling, and it feels like a justice system at breaking point.
One that's breaking the lives of those directly involved, helping survivors navigate the process are advisors like Fionn.
You don't really realise, do you, what you're walking into when you report sometimes, of just how lengthy it's going to be. I know it's frustrating, but the further actions are only to strengthen your case.
Fionn makes countless reassuring calls like this every week. A new report by charity Victim Support has found the delays are leading to survivors self-harming and being diagnosed with PTSD.
Our job is to manage expectations. Reporting is obviously hard in itself, and you do your interview and then it suddenly becomes quite static and you don't hear anything back for a while.
Sky News has learned some cases aren't being scheduled till 2027.
You must put these cases as a priority. There must be a court available for them, a judge available for them. Increase the funding for those who deal with these cases. We need more specially trained police officers. We need more specially trained barristers to prosecute and defend.
Emmy's trial eventually went ahead this year. The defendant was found not guilty. Afterwards, the judge wrote to her and acknowledged the 5-year wait.
You've had to suffer emotionally distressing and inordinate delay. The delay is
The Ministry of Justice told us they've inherited a criminal justice system crisis, with cases delayed for far too long. They say they'll address this deep injustice to fast-track rape cases so victims and survivors have the experience they deserve. But for those waiting, it feels like their lives are on hold. Ashna Harinag, Sky News.
Finally, it's been a day of sporting records and record breakers.
Nadal is the US Open champion. The trophy cabinet is complete.
Tennis great Rafael Nadal has announced he will retire from the sport next month. The Spaniard won an incredible 22 men's singles Grand Slam titles, including a record 14 French Open victories. He was also a double Olympic gold medalist and helped Spain win the Davis Cup 4 times. And more records tumbled in the first test in Pakistan. Harry Brook became the first English player to score a triple century for 34 years, as England declared on 823 for 7, the 4th highest score of all time. Brook and Joe Root put on 454 together, England's highest ever partnership. And Root also became the first Englishman to score 20,000 international runs. Congratulations to them. Now, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the political commentator